China's trillion-dollar plan for world domination is being challenged by the U.S. This is America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. The United States and its allies are trying to challenge China's Belt and Road Initiative. What's the Belt and Road Initiative, you ask? It's a trillion-dollar investment scheme by the Chinese Communist Party to connect the world to China that has absolutely no hidden downside.
The land belt runs from China through South and Central Asia into Europe, while the Maritime Road connects coastal Chinese cities with Africa and the Mediterranean.
Wait a minute. They're calling the roads that run through the land a belt, and they're calling invisible shipping routes that run through the ocean a road. I'm confused now. But maybe this video from Chinese state-run media will give you a much better idea.
The belt connects the land, the road moves on the sea. The promise that they hold is joy and prosperity. Future's coming out. The belt and road is how.
Wow, I love it! I mean, it still makes no sense, but it is incredibly catchy. This is why the Belt and Road Initiative was also originally known as One Belt, One Earworm. Chinese leader Xi Jinping has pledged $1 trillion for the Belt and Road and has tied in about 70 countries and international organizations. I'm sorry, that was all information and not very catchy. Oh. But as I said, the US is creating a powerful alternative to China's Belt and Road. Last year I talked about the BUILD Act. Congress passed it in October. Basically, it's a massive upgrade to the U.S. organization that handles infrastructure investment in developing countries. It was called the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, or OPIC. But on October 1st of this year, it will be merged with other U.S. development groups into a new organization called the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, or USDFC, or DFC for short. And China is clearly the target. As it says on the DFC website, it was created specifically to help countries sidestep opaque and unsustainable debt traps being laid by Beijing. And the budget will double to $60 billion. Now that is still a far cry from the $1 trillion Xi Jinping has pledged to the Belt and Road. And there are some other key differences between China's model and the US one, which I'll get to in a minute. But it turns out, the U.S. isn't the only country interested in challenging China's Belt and Road. A month after the BUILD Act was passed, the U.S. signed a trilateral development deal with Japan and Australia. Working together, the three countries will provide infrastructure development in developing countries in the Indo-Pacific region. Now that's China's backyard, where some of the oldest Belt and Road investments are. So maybe instead of China's panda diplomacy, we'll have Australian koala diplomacy. Neither sound appealing to me. But the Indo-Pacific needs a lot of investment. According to this report from the Asian Development Bank, the region needs about $1.7 trillion of investment per year. And the US-Japan-Australia deal is intended to drive economic growth in emerging markets and provide an alternative to state-directive initiatives that can leave developing countries worse off. Now they don't mention here which countries' state-directed initiatives, but it's China. In fact, just last month, the US signed another trilateral investment agreement with the EU and Canada that offers a robust alternative to unsustainable state-led models. What's up with all the state-led model talk? Well, this is one of the key differences between the infrastructure investment program the US is creating and China's Belt and Road. OPIC and eventually the new DFC are based on a private sector model. Traditionally, aid to developing countries was through government grants. This is different. The US government helps connect private US companies to developing countries. The goal was to make sure that OPIC's investments and loans, which are created around sound business plans, enable it to operate as a self-sustaining agency at no cost to American taxpayers. As this statement from the White House says, this approach will help to meet the region's genuine needs while avoiding unsustainable debt burdens for the nations of the region. After the EU and Canada deal, the head of OPIC told the South China Morning Post, OPIC was committed to pursuing development finance according to 5 principles: the sovereignty of the host nation, environmental protection, local job creation, transparency, and ensuring each project is long-lasting. Interestingly, all of those issues are basically criticisms of China's Belt and Road, although he didn't mention China specifically. Basically, when it comes to these investment deals, the Chinese regime is the elephant in the room. Or, I guess, the giant panda in the room. That's because the US model is pretty much the opposite of Beijing's model. In China, everything is backed by the state, connecting state-owned companies or companies with other links to the Chinese state to developing countries. And this means the investment is mainly for political reasons and not tied to free market principles. Is that a problem? Well, the concern is that the Chinese Communist Party is acting like the international investment version of a loan shark. The Chinese loans are often unsustainable. Debt piles up, the countries end up defaulting on their loans, but instead of the Communist Party breaking their kneecaps, they just force those countries to give up strategic assets, things like natural resources or ports that could be used by the Chinese military. In a recent white paper by the Institute of International Finance, it said there is legitimate concern China is using debt diplomacy. This has happened to a lot of countries already: Sri Lanka, Djibouti, Kenya, Pakistan. So if the Communist Party is acting like a loan shark, why aren't developing nations jumping at the chance to work with the US and its allies? Well, because US deals also come with strings attached. OPIC's investments are dependent on several other stringent requirements, such as human rights protection, transparency, local job creation, host nation sovereignty, and an enduring legacy. The Chinese Communist Party's Belt and Road has none of those things. That's why some of the biggest customers of the Belt and Road are authoritarian regimes. If you're a brutal dictator, what would you rather do? Take US money, but be required to allow free press and transparent elections that might not work out so well for you, or take China's money and maybe get your country deeply in debt, but the Chinese Communist Party will help keep you in power. According to Freedom House, China is now exporting its model of comprehensive internet censorship and surveillance around the world, offering training, seminars, and study trips, as well as advanced equipment that takes advantage of artificial intelligence and facial recognition technologies. Beijing's desire and capacity to spread totalitarian models of digitally enabled social control pose a major risk to democracy worldwide. And it doesn't stop at digital social control. Venezuela is a major Belt and Road country in Latin America. This is their Chinese-built VN-4 armored personnel carrier, also called Rhinoceros, and that is a group of protesters. I'm sure the Communist Party is just feeling nostalgic for Tiananmen. That was 30 years ago. Of course, the problem is, China has been pushing the Belt and Road so much, it's no longer just third world dictatorships getting hooked. At the end of March, Beijing nabbed its first G7 country, Italy. Dang it, Italy, you really dropped the meatball. The US National Security Council tweeted, "Italy is a major global economy and a great investment destination. Endorsing BRI lends legitimacy to China's predatory approach to investment and will bring no benefits to the Italian people." And that's just one more factor making the EU very nervous about Chinese investment. Not that it needed more reasons. In 2017, the EU tried to issue a statement at the UN condemning China's human rights abuses, but Greece stepped in to block it. That is, after Greece just took a belt load of money from China. China's ability to affect voting inside the EU is making a lot of officials nervous, which is a big part of why the EU joined with Canada, Japan, and Australia in signing up with the US plan. Still, Chinese money is very tempting. And that's why, even though Japan signed on with the US, and the Chinese Communist Party actively produces anti-Japanese propaganda, last October, Japan and China agreed to cooperate on 50 international investment projects, including smart cities in Thailand. Basically, both the US and China are racking up supporters ahead of the upcoming G20 summit being held in Osaka, Japan this June. Of course, all this talk of investing in developing countries might sound surprising for a president that has been repeatedly criticized for isolationism. But that's the wonderful thing about China. Sure, US politics may be a mess, But the Chinese Communist Party brings us all together. So what do you think of America's pushback against the Belt and Road? Leave your comments below. And before you go, now is the time when I answer questions from fans who support America Uncovered on the crowdfunding website Patreon. Meep asks, "Hey there, Uncovered team. Who out of you lot enjoys puns, and who sighs at the thought of puns being uttered? I feel like you guys ought to put in more puns so that the depressing research doesn't sting so much." Well, I definitely have to say producer Matt is the biggest fan of puns. I wouldn't be surprised to see him compete someday at the Brooklyn Punderdome. Yeah, that's a thing. As for who sighs the most at puns, that's Shelley, usually at Matt's puns. Thanks for your question and your support, Meep. YouTube demonetizes controversial videos like we have on America Uncovered. So, we rely on your support on Patreon for as little as $1 per episode. As a way of saying thanks, I'll answer your questions on the show. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.